The Hale Tower woke before the city did. On the 49th floor, the lights in the executive wing hummed to life one by one, washing glass corridors in a pale, orderly glow. Cleaning carts whispered over marble. Security cameras blinked their red dots like patient fireflies. And in the corner conference room with the wraparound view, a single whiteboard waited, crowded with equations, arrows, and the stubborn boxed question mark that had taunted a dozen very expensive minds the night before. Zayden Hale stood in front of that whiteboard, coffee cooling in his hand. He was the man whose name crowned the building, a billionaire who wore silence like a tailored suit. His company, Hale Dynamics, built mathematical engines that digested oceans of data for banks and hospitals and disaster planners. He liked puzzles. He liked what puzzles did to people. He liked how they revealed the difference between effort and clarity. The room smelled faintly of solvent and citrus. Someone had wiped down the table perfectly straight. He could see the city waking in the window's reflection. A first train sliding into the station, a bakery's plume of steam, a jogger in a neon jacket flashing along the river. He closed his eyes and replayed last night's meeting. A new risk model, a missing piece. The equation that should have closed the loop kept refusing to balance without an ugly patch. One of the data scientists suggested brute force approximation. Zayden wanted symmetry. He wanted the clean click of inevitability. A small cough came from the doorway. Zayden turned and found a woman in a gray uniform hovering there, mop in one hand, her other hand on the shoulder of a girl in a faded hoodie. The girl couldn't have been more than 11. Wide brown eyes. A pink elastic on one wrist. A too-big backpack patched with a crooked star. "Sorry, sir," the woman said quickly, dipping her head. "We'll be fast. The conference rooms are on our list before the day shift comes in." "It's fine," Zayden said, stepping aside. They moved like a practiced duet. The woman, Anaya, according to the stitched badge, wiped and straightened. The girl, Mira, if the scuffed keychain on her backpack could be trusted, set down a thermos, unscrewed the lid, and handed her mother folded napkins without being asked. Quiet, efficient, invisible. The way service work is trained to be. Zayden went back to the board. Though he wasn't seeing variables anymore, he was watching, out of the edge of his attention, the way the girl's eyes kept drifting to the wall of symbols. Curiosity has a texture. He recognized it. "Do you like math?" he asked, not looking away from the board. Anaya tensed. "She won't touch anything, sir." Mira's ears went pink. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "It's just the boxes and arrows. They look like a maze." Zayden set his coffee down. "It is a kind of maze," he said. "The kind you can't run with your feet." Mira nodded solemnly as if mazes were a serious business. Her gaze snagged on a small island in the corner of the board. A cluster of numbers circled twice, an arrow, and the boxed question mark. "What's that part?" she asked. "That," he said, "is the part where a dozen adults pretended they weren't tired." Anaya shot her daughter a warning look. "We are almost done, sir." Zayden should have let them finish. He should have gone back to his office, checked the futures, pinged legal about the European filing. But the girl had taken one delicate step closer to the board, the way you step toward water without deciding to swim. He found himself asking, "Do you like puzzles, Mira?" She blinked at the sound of her name, surprised that he'd found it. "At school sometimes we get number riddles," she said. "They're quieter than people." He almost smiled. "This one is noisy," he said, tapping the question mark. "We're trying to measure uncertainty without overcounting it." Mira hesitated. "Like when you fold paper? If you trace something but the page is doubled, you might think there are two drawings, but really there's just one." Anaya's hand paused on the spray bottle. Zayden set the marker down. "Something like that," he said. Then, because he was not a man who believed in accidents, he erased a small section of the mess and wrote one simple thing. He uncapped the red marker and drew a box around it. "Can you solve this?" Anaya's breath caught. "Sir, please." "She needs to." "It's okay, Mama," Mira whispered, eyes on the board. Zayden fully intended to let her do the algebra, say x equals 5, y equals 1, and call it a charming moment. Children do worksheets. Executives clap. The day rolls on, but that isn't what happened. Mira stared at the two lines, chewing her lip. Then she looked past them at the original tangle, the arrows and conditionals and the little island of numbers. She didn't pick up a marker. She lifted her hand and traced the air, connecting things that grown men in tailored suits had unconnected all night. If this, she said softly, tapping the corner where a probability measure was nested inside another. Is the same risk counted here? Then you're adding it twice, just with different names. If you pretend the second is on tracing paper and fold it back, it should cancel. You could try. I think you could try subtracting the conditional, not the marginal. She said the words like she was walking over a creek on stones, testing each one with her toe. Zayden's heartbeat ticked louder in his ears. Show me, Anaya flinched. Please, sir. We can't. But Mira was already on tiptoe, the red marker trembling a little in her fingers. She didn't attack the whole thing. She covered the lower right corner with the heel of her hand and recreated a small version of it beside the simple system he'd written. Then she drew 2 slender parentheses and inside them a subtraction that made his neck prickle. AB, PA plus PB, PAB becomes affix Y, effix malnaf Y, effix Y. It's not exactly this, she said quickly, blush returning, but like this idea. You asked it to do 3 jobs. It only needs 2. The room went quiet in a new way. Not silence as absence, but the hush that follows a bell. Zayden took the marker, added 1 line above hers, then another below, letting the algebra's gravity pull. The ugly term they'd been propping up with an approximation shrank like a shadow at noon. The boxed question mark wasn't solved, but it had unmistakably moved. How did you see that? He asked. Mira ducked her head, suddenly 11 again. My teacher says to make problems smaller, she said. And my Abu used to say to put the noisy part in another room. The word Abu landed between them like a small stone dropped into clear water. Anaya's knuckles whitened around the spray bottle. Zayden caught himself glancing at her hands at the pale line where a ring had been. He had been raised to keep his questions in their proper places. He looked back at the board. Do you like school? He asked. Mira nodded. Math is my favorite. And drawing buildings, and I don't like lunch. Why not lunch? The question was out before he could stop it. She shrugged one shoulder. Sometimes it makes my head feel loud. Anaya set the spray bottle down very carefully. We're finished here, she said, voice steady. Come, Mira. Mira capped the marker, pressing it into its rattly plastic until it clicked. Her gaze flicked to the city beyond the glass, to the tiny river ribboning silver. The lines look like they want to be straight, she said to no one in particular. Zayden had a dozen things to do. Instead, he said, it's early. Would you both join me for breakfast in the cafeteria? Anaya's head came up sharply. No, sir. Thank you. It's just food, he said, surprised at the softness in his own tone. They have good parathas. And very bad coffee. Mira's eyes lit at parathas. She glanced at her mother, then at the hallway clock. We have time. No, Anaya said again, more gently. We don't, we must go. Zayden read things for a living. Markets, rooms, faces. He read the space between the two of them now, the math of it. Love minus margins. Pride plus hunger. He nodded once. All right, they moved to the door. Anaya paused. I am sorry if she helped, Zayden said. Thank you. They disappeared down the corridor, the wheel of the cleaning cart whispering against the seam in the marble. The room felt different in their wake, as if someone had opened a window to air no one knew was stale. Zayden stared at the board. Then he pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed without looking at the screen. Elena, he said when his chief of staff answered, voice still sleep-rough. Find out who's on the facilities contract for the executive floors. Discreetly, and call the lab. Tell them to hold the model. I want to bring someone from outside to sanity check a deduction. From outside, Elena said, alert now. Who? A child, he said, and surprised himself saying it out loud. And her mother. A beat. Is this one of your jokes? I don't have jokes before 8, he said, and hung up. He went back to the whiteboard. He added 2 lines of his own under Mira's parentheses. The path was there, faint but walkable, like footprints in fresh snow. He felt something he hadn't felt in months. The bright, clean click of inevitability approaching. When he finally left the conference room, the executive wing had begun to fill. Assistants with tablet folios, a trader on speakerphone, 2 engineers arguing about a kernel. The building's arteries warming. In the elevator, he caught his reflection and realized he was smiling a little. It felt unfamiliar on his face, almost like a borrowed expression. On the mezzanine, he saw them again. Mother and daughter by the revolving doors. the morning spilling around them in a rush of coats and metallic greetings. Mira had put on a knitted beanie with a pom-pom, the kind that makes children look rounder and more easily hurt. The city always looked different from the ground. Mira thought about that as she and her mother stood at the bus stop, the Hale Tower shrinking behind them like a dream being folded and put away. Cars passed. Wind tugged at Anaya's dupatta. The world seemed unaware something extraordinary had happened inside that quiet glass room. Anaya hadn't spoken a word since they stepped out of the building. "Mama, did I do something wrong?" Mira finally asked. Anaya exhaled slowly. "No, Betty, you just did something people like us are not supposed to do." "What do you mean?" "You were seen." That afternoon, while Anaya cleaned the 12th floor offices, her phone buzzed 3 times. Unknown number. She ignored it. On the 3rd call, a voicemail appeared. She didn't listen to it until night when Mira was asleep curled under a thin blanket. It was a woman's voice, calm, professional. "Hello, this is Elena Brooks, Chief of Staff to Mr. Zayden Hale. He would like to arrange a small visit to Riverbend Middle School, room 7. He also wishes to speak with you privately. There is no trouble. Please call back." Anaya's chest tightened. Trouble always began with someone saying, "There is no trouble." She deleted the message. The next morning, just after the bell rang at Riverbend Middle, a polished black car rolled to a stop outside. Students gathering at the entrance froze, staring. The driver stepped out, followed by a tall man with calm eyes and an overcoat that probably cost more than the school's yearly chalk budget. Zayden Hale. He walked inside like someone who didn't know how to be unsure of anything. A secretary stammered. A teacher dropped a stack of papers. He knocked on the door of room 7. Inside, 20 students turned toward him. Chalk paused mid-equation in Mrs. Harper's hand, and in the second row, Mira's pencil fell from her fingers. "Good morning," Zayden said softly. "May I come in?" Mrs. Harper blinked twice. Of course, sir." "This is unexpected." He stepped inside. "I heard this class likes solving problems. I brought some books for your library. On numbers and patterns." A ripple of whispers. Mira shrank into her seat. Mrs. Harper recovered quickly. "Class, this is Mr. Hale." But Zayden didn't look at the class. He looked at Mira. "Ms. Anaya wasn't answering her phone," he said quietly to Mrs. Harper. "She is proud and careful. I don't want to cause her fear. I only wish to speak with her daughter's teacher. For now." Mira's heart beat against her ribs like it wanted to escape. Mrs. Harper nodded. "Mira, would you step outside with us?" Mira stood slowly. Eyes burned into her back, curious, confused, jealous. In the hallway, Zayden spoke quietly. "Your daughter is gifted. She thinks in solutions before most people recognize a problem." Mrs. Harper's brows lifted. "Mira is bright, but she solved a probability correction on my executive whiteboard," he said. Silence. Then, very softly, "She's 11. Zayden nodded once. "I want to enroll her in the National Math Academy program. All expenses covered. Transportation, supplies, clothing, and an allowance so her mother won't lose income." "No," a voice said sharply. All 3 turned. Anaya stood at the end of the hallway, mop in hand, face pale but eyes burning. "Mama," Mira whispered. Anaya walked forward, chin high. "You do not decide these things, sir. You do not come to my child's school and offer her a life that will make her ashamed of where she came from." "It's an opportunity," Zayden said carefully. "It's a reminder she is not like them," Anaya replied, "that she must work twice for half." "She already does," he said, their eyes locked. For a second, power met pride in the center of a faded school hallway. "I'm not asking you to accept charity," he said. "I'm asking you to let your daughter become what she already is." Anaya swallowed. "She won't leave me." "She doesn't have to," he said. "There are weekend and evening programs, private tutors, and the cost. My cost, not yours. I don't owe you anything." "No," Zayden said softly. "You don't." Silence extended like a tightrope. Mira stood between them, small hands clenched. "Let me choose," she whispered. Anaya looked at her daughter, really looked. At the quiet fire in her eyes, her shoulders dropped. "Just a little." "We will think about it." Zayden inclined his head. "That's all I ask." He handed Mrs. Harper a sealed envelope. "Inside are forms. For the scholarship program. Call if she's interested." And then he left, just as quietly as he arrived. That evening in their tiny kitchen, Mira pushed a bowl of rice around her plate. "Mama?" "Yes, why were you angry?" Anaya didn't answer. Mira continued softly. "You always say God sends chances and people miss them because they're afraid." Anaya closed her eyes. "I'm not afraid," Mira said. "Are you?" It was a simple question. It broke something. Anaya sat down. "Yes," she whispered. "I am." Mira reached for her hand. "We can be afraid together. And still do it," tears welled. "You want to go?" "Yes," Mira said. "But only if you're with me." Anaya wiped her eyes. "Always." She looked at the envelope. "We will call him tomorrow," she said. Mira smiled, but neither of them knew something else had already begun. Because in a dimly lit archive room in Hale Tower, Ilana, the chief of staff, had opened a dusty file about an employee incident from 8 years ago. A man on the janitorial team, brilliant, quiet Pakistani immigrant, dismissed after a math solution he proposed was inappropriate. Name, Amir Hussein. Relationship status, married to Anaya. Daughter, Mira. She paused, and then opened the next page. Handwritten, deceased in factory accident 4 years ago. Elena swallowed. Attached was a small scrap of paper, a math equation, and a note, "For my daughter. One day she will finish what I couldn't." By the time Saturday arrived, Riverbend had learned 2 incompatible truths about Mira. That she was quiet, and that quiet does not mean small. Mrs. Harper taped a flyer to the whiteboard. City Math League qualifier, visiting coach. The visiting coach wasn't listed by name, but everyone knew. Rumors slipped faster than chalk dust. Mira pressed her palms together under her desk to keep them from shaking. She'd gone to the National Math Academy orientation on Thursday evening. It smelled like dry erase and ambition. The hallways were lined with framed problems, each one signed by a student whose name now appeared in articles about algorithms. A woman with silver hair and bright eyes had handed Mira a packet, spoke to her not like a child but like a colleague. On the bus home, Mira had stared out of the window at a string of laundromats and bodegas and thought very quietly, "I might live 2 lives at once." "Riverbend will send 2 students to the qualifier," Mrs. Harper announced. "We'll run a friendly in-class contest today to choose. No pressure. No grades." The class did what classes do, turned a no-pressure contest into a countdown to humiliation. John, whose father ran a hedge fund and whose backpack looked like it came with a trust account, leaned back in his chair and said to no one in particular, "Finally, something not about feelings." Mira told herself not to care. Numbers were steadier when you lowered your voice around them. At lunch, she took the long way to the cafeteria to avoid the football boys. In the stairwell, she found the new flyer. Hale Foundation Book Drive, STEM for All. Someone had drawn a mustache on Zayden Hale's photo. Under it, a scrawl, "Buying smart friends." Mira traced the letters with her eyes and kept walking. In the cafeteria line, the mashed potatoes looked tired. John and his orbit were at the end of the table, arguing about whether an answer counted if you guessed the distribution. When Mira passed, he lowered his voice just enough that she had to lean forward to hear it, which made it worse. "Must be nice to get chauffeur-driven math lessons." "I walk," Mira said. "Right," he smirked. "Into offices you're paid to mop." The words hit like cold water down the back. She felt her face heat, then cool. She had learned this trick from her mother. Let shame pass through you like weather. Don't build a house for it. That afternoon, the class turned into an arena. Mrs. Harper split them into 2 groups of 10 and announced a relay. 1 person at the board. "When you're done, tag the next." John's team went first. He swaggered to the board, solved a system fast and sloppy, got half credit for speed. His team whooped. Mira's team filed up. She was assigned 3rd in the relay. By the time she stepped forward, the room had thickened, the smell of marker, the squeak of sneaker rubber, the animal electricity of competition. Her problem looked ordinary. A jar contains red and blue marbles. Pick 2 without replacement. Probability both are red. Now generalize. She'd done versions of it 100 times, but the twist wasn't the marbles. It was the last line. Show 2 different methods that agree. She wrote the direct count quickly. Then she paused, turned sideways, and drew a tiny tree. Branch for red, Branch for blue. She crossed a branch, added a leaf, then did something no one expected. She circled the whole thing and wrote, small and neat. Same miscount as yesterday. Mrs. Harper leaned forward. Mira? Mira tapped the tree lightly. When you pick the first red and then the second, you're tempted to count both orders as different events, even though our question didn't care about order. This is like folding the tracing paper. The correction isn't a trick. It's acknowledging we said the same thing 2 ways. She finished the second method in 8 clean lines. John rolled his eyes, but he was watching. Mira's team won the relay by 2 points. Mrs. Harper announced the 2 qualifiers, John and Mira. John immediately began texting. Mira folded her paper like it was a small animal that might spook. After class, Mrs. Harper caught Mira as she slipped out. Your parent coming to the qualifier? Mira glanced down the hall. Anaya was on the afternoon shift, which meant she'd only just be able to make it if the bus gods were kind. She'll try. She should see you, Mrs. Harper said. Not as order, not even as hope, but as fact. The qualifier was hosted at East Side Prep, a school with lawns that looked like someone ironed them. Banners fluttered. Welcome City Math League. Volunteers set out bottled water and pencils that felt heavy in the hand. Students milled in clumps, shoes too clean, nerves making their high ponytails tighter. Anaya and Mira arrived with 5 minutes to spare. Anaya's uniform pressed as best as an iron could manage on a shared outlet. She touched the seam of Mira's sleeve, straightened nothing. Do your best, she said. Not for them. For you. Mira nodded, then stopped. For Abu too, she said. Anaya's throat tightened. For him too. In the bleachers, the whisper moved before the man did. Zayden. He wore nothing flashy, a dark sweater, a coat the color of rain, but his presence rearranged corridors. The principal of Eastside Prep shook his hand as if he were awarding him the building on a silver tray. So honored. Our boys have been preparing for months. Our kids, the coordinator corrected gently. Of course, the principal said, not hearing. Zayden scanned the bleachers. He found Anaya not by her uniform, but by the way she made herself small without shrinking. He lifted a hand. She nodded once. The first round was individual. 30 questions in 45 minutes. The room took on that test hush. Pen's tiny scratching, throat clears weaponized. Midway through, 2 things happened quickly. John dropped his pen, picked it up, and smirked as if to say even his clumsiness had swagger. And Mira encountered a problem that wasn't about numbers. Question 12 read, a company models risk using EFXY. Cars EFX plus EFY. Explain the missing term. When should it be included? Justify your answer with a simple example. Her cheeks warmed. It was the whiteboard, hidden in a cartoon suit. She wrote carefully, missing term is minus EFXY or minus the interaction term, depending on context. It should be included to avoid double counting dependency. Example, counting outcomes with overlap like drawing 2 reds without replacement. Requires subtracting the intersection. She paused. The words felt too bare for how the idea mattered inside her. She added one more sentence. Double counting isn't just mistake. It is forgetting to admit a thing happened once with 2 names. She moved on. When the round ended, the room exhaled like a held breath finally released. Parent chatter rose. A boy cried in hiccups and was ferried to a hallway. John strolled to the water table, bumped Mira's shoulder with his as he passed. Try not to embarrass our school, he said lightly. Try not to embarrass yourself, Zayden said, materializing at Mira's side as if he'd been conjured by the syllables. There was no heat in his tone, only a cool precision that stopped the comment's spill. John flushed the particular flush of someone unaccustomed to being corrected by a stranger with gravitas. He looked up and understood. He muttered something about stretching and retreated. You didn't have to, Mira said. I didn't, Zayden agreed. But sometimes subtraction is mercy. She smiled despite herself. That's not how subtraction works. Depends what you're removing, he said. Round 2 was a team round. Tables of 4. Eastside's table looked like a brochure. Riverbend's table looked like a city. Mira, a girl who loved K-pop and fractions. A boy who doodled snails in the margins and was quiet until vectors showed up. And John. They were handed a stapled packet and a large sheet for answers. 10 problems. 20 minutes of strategy? Snail Boy said. Don't lose time on the shiny one, Mira said. If a problem looks like it loves itself too much, skip it and come back. Ego is slow. John snorted but didn't disagree. He grabbed problem 1. Mira took problem 4, a combinatorics puzzle disguised as seating chart politics. She sketched circles, drew arrows, wrote overcount here, and built the correction like a small, sturdy bridge. The team kept pace. At minute 15, they hit the shiny one, a graph theory path count that looked like a spiderweb had gone to graduate school. John started hacking at it. Mira looked at the start node and felt something quiet. She saw, not the path, but the places their counting would double back. She drew parentheses in the corner, tiny private parentheses, and wrote a subtractive recurrence. The answer fell out like a folded paper crane opening in her palm. They finished with 20 seconds to spare. The coordinator collected papers. Anaya pressed her hands between her knees. She found she was praying without knowing the words. Scores posted on a projected spreadsheet. Murmurs rose, then swelled. Eastside Prep took first, as they always did, but Riverbend's team, Mira's team, took second. And Mira's individual score was the highest among public schools. She'd beaten John by a nose hair and Eastside second, Seed by a full problem and a proof. Cheers in the Riverbend section sounded like they'd never had occasion to practice cheering and were therefore over-enthusiastic and odd. Anaya did not cheer. She simply placed her hand over her heart and closed her eyes for one beat. The way a person does when a storm passes and you find, surprised, that your roof held. After photos and the awkward ritual of medals that look more impressive than they are, the principal of Eastside Prep took the microphone. He thanked donors, coaches, the concept of excellence. Then he said, "We also have a special guest, Mr. Hale, who will say something brief." Zayden cut him gently, taking the mic with a small nod. The boardroom was no longer just a room. It had become a test not of numbers, but of humanity. Mira stood quietly in front of the whiteboard, the red marker still warm in her fingers. Behind her, written clearly, were the words no one in that glass tower ever expected to see. Hussein correction. The room fell into a strange kind of silence, the kind that stretched between pride and disbelief. Some board members stared in confusion. Others, with tightly folded arms, looked threatened. A few simply watched, as if something sacred had been placed before them, and they weren't sure whether to accept it or destroy it. Mira stepped back. Her heart pounded hard against her ribs, reading not from fear but from something new. Something like belonging. Anaya stood beside her. Her hands weren't trembling anymore. And then, before anyone could speak, Zayden Hale walked forward. He didn't stand in front of the equation. He stood beside it and beside them. This is not charity. His voice was steady. This, he said, gesturing to the equation, to the red ink, to the little pair of parentheses just like Mira drew that morning in the classroom, is not pity. This is correction. A few eyebrows rose. I've heard talk in this room about equal chances, donor image, proper funding, but we are standing in a tower built by people who were seen, not because they were rich, but because someone believed in their mind. He looked directly at one of the older board members. And today, I saw a mind. He turned to Mira, and it looked like someone I used to know. That sentence hung in the air. A forgotten connection. Alina stepped forward quietly, in her hands in a photograph, old black and white. Edges yellowed. She placed it on the glass table. Everyone leaned forward. It showed two young men smiling in front of a chalkboard full of equations. One had sharp eyes and messy hair. The other wore glasses and held a notebook against his chest. Names written on the back. Thomas Hale, Zayden's grandfather. Abdul Rahman Hussein, teacher, mathematician. Mira's great-grandfather. Gasps went around the room. My grandfather, Zayden said quietly, was not born a Hale. He was the son of a miner. He was going to leave school to work. But a teacher, this man saw him solving geometry problems in the hallway, and paid for his education from his own pocket. He looked at Mira. That teacher was your great-grandfather. A debt older than money, Zayden continued softly. He died in poverty, forgotten by institutions. But my grandfather never forgot him. This tower, this foundation, exists because someone like your father, someone like your great-grandfather, believed knowledge belongs to everyone. Then he turned to the board. So no, this is not charity. This is a debt. And today, I am paying it. No one moved. Someone whispered, "The vote." "What about the vote?" Zayden looked them straight in the eyes. "You can vote however you like," he said calmly. "But hear this. If this foundation supports only those who already have privilege, my name, and my money, walk out of this room tonight." Dead silence. One by one, hands went up. Unanimous. The Hussein Legacy Scholarship was approved. Not for one girl. For any overlooked, brilliant mind, no matter where they come from or what they wear, or whether their parents clean the floors of the building where geniuses are born. Years later, the world did what the world always does. It moved on. But some things didn't fade. A small public school soon had a new sign outside its door: Hussein Mathematics Program, where every mind counts. A mother no longer had to mop floors at dawn. She became a coordinator for scholarships, helping other parents who thought dreams weren't for them. A girl with dark hair and a quiet voice grew into a young woman who carried chalk in her pocket and fire in her mind. Mira Hussein became the youngest person ever to publish a paper in theoretical probability, credited beside another name, Amir Hussein, in memory. The father who wrote equations on scrap paper when no one was watching. That tower again? Years later, she stood again inside the Hale tower, not as a maid's daughter, not even as a scholarship student, but as the head researcher of the Zayden Hale Foundation for Mathematical Innovation. She traced her fingers over the glass plaque beside the elevator. It didn't say Hale Tower anymore. It read, Hale Hussein Center for Mathematics and Human Potential, for the minds no one saw coming. She smiled, and somewhere inside her, she heard her father's voice. Put the noisy part in another room.